Okay, so our question was 1-3, and it was rank and order the three greatest causes of the Revolutionary War and choose from the following five choices. A, unfair and excessive taxation. B, repression of civil liberties. C, limitation of westward expansion. D, oppressiveness of the British military. And E, limitation of the colony's economic development.
And for number one, we chose unfair and excessive taxation, which was due to the costly 7 Years' War, the British required payment from the colonists for their protection. Some of the things that were set up were the Navigation Acts, which regulated colonial trade and collect taxes, Plantation Duty Act, which plantations trade only with Britain, like on tax on tobacco and other such items like indigo, as well as the Sugar Act, which was a tax on sugar and molasses, the Stamp Act, which was a tax on legal papers, newspapers, pamphlets, the Townshend Acts, which was taxes on imported items, glass, lead, paper, tea, etc., and then the Tea Act, which let British East India Company sell low quality tea, undermined colonial tea merchants. And although these taxes weren't necessarily very expensive towards the colonists, they were a unseen thing that the colonists had never experienced with before. So due to this, the colonists had a major uprising against taxes, and they were not very happy with them.
So the second point that we chose was the repression of civil liberties. So basically, Britain wanted to make as much money out of the colonies as physically possible, and they had the power to enact various laws in the Parliament outside of America, and that significantly affected the life in the colonies. The acts of the Parliament, they benefited the British, but not the colonies as much. And the Americans were not afforded the same rights as the British people, and they didn't have any representation at all, and this led to a lot of civil liberties being repressed. An example of this is taxation without representation. Basically, the colonists were angry that they were being taxed by a government that was really distant from them, and then they protested to the government using that slogan, taxation without representations. And this caused a lot of protests, including boycotting goods, and it escalated and it eventually ended in the Boston Massacre in 1770. The British also enforced unlimited search and seizure. So they established the writs of assistance, which were documents which served as a general search warrant, allowing the British officials to enter any ship or building that they suspected might hold smuggled goods. And so this repressed the colonials of their freedom and privacy. The Quartering Act was also another example of repression of privacy. The colonials were forced to give up their houses to accommodate British officials, and despite not wanting to. But it did change after several protests, and the Third Amendment took place prohibiting this. And the final thing is the Boston Port Act. So the British officials closed the Boston port and demanded that the city's residents pay nearly $1 million for the amount of tea that was dumped in the Boston Harbor. And this also caused the port closed the port to trade, which caused conflicts in jobs, and it caused merchants to experience a decline in sales. So basically, through the repression of their civil liberties, the colonies began to emerge as independent nations. They began to feel anger towards the British and spoke out about it. So this resulted in colonial rebellion. So the two main groups that spoke out against British repression were women and African Americans. Women were especially evident in political rallies, as were the African Americans who suffered a lot of the effects of the Revolutionary War. So they both had a huge part in stepping out and speaking towards British repression. Another huge factor is that repression also caused nationalism. So the combined effort of not being happy with the British repression caused the 13 colonies to unify against a common cause.
All right, and next is the limitations of the colony's economic development. And due to the British seeing the colonists as nothing more than a trading post, and in the eyes of them, they were just an extension of their empire, which they used for trading and acquiring goods from. But the colonies were much more than developed than other colonies that the British had set forth previously. The Navigation Acts were set in place in 1651 so that England could control who the colonies could trade with regarding to the other countries. They were not strictly enforced due to there being no real issue with trading early on in the time of the 1600s, but later on they were enforced more strictly. Um, If it stunted the growth of the colonies by not allowing them to set up trade relationships with foreign countries and create diplomatic relationships through that, as well as not experiencing the culture of these countries through goods imported. While some colonies benefited off of this, like the New England colonies being the sole provider of ships for England, other colonies like the middle and southern colonies were taken advantage of by the British buying their crops for low prices and not allowing them to go to other countries to sell. Due to this, smuggling was widely practiced and many colonists made their fortunes from this, resulting in the British creating more acts cracking down on them. It kept the colonies from being able to economically develop and invest in infrastructure and other things that the British would not want to invest in the colonies. This angered many colonists on all levels of society, the social hierarchy, because they were all affected in different ways due to the buying of foreign goods from England at inflated prices or selling goods at extremely low prices. Thank you. Why am I on your computer? Stop.